Welcome to Empowered. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski. We've been talking for a long time about the same things, such as the gender pay gap, retention of women in senior leadership positions, but we're short on getting commitments for tangible actions. For over a decade, today's guest has been on the internal stage speaking at global forums on women's economic empowerment and working with various task forces of the B20. She's attended many G7, G20 summits over the last 20 years and is no stranger to deciphering global political leader conjecture. Today, I'm joined by Lida Preyma, founder and CEO of Cēlandaire Capital and co-founder and managing partner of the global climate finance Accelerator. Lida, what a mouthful. Welcome to Empowered.
Thank you very much for having me here.
I'm really excited to talk to you because you have been on the global stage for such a long time, and I'm really interested to hear what you have to say. So tell us about what you're seeing in the international fora on women's economic empowerment.
Sure. Well, and again, thank you for having me on the show, Elizabeth. I think you did a really good job at presenting the overarching problem. And that is that we have been talking about women's economic empowerment for a very long time. And while progress has been made, we aren't really far enough, especially on the global level. And so just to level set a little bit, economic empowerment really is the provision of agency for women to be able to control their own destiny and independence through wealth creation. So this is fair pay for work, being able to start a business, purchase a home, any other sort of assets, and so on. So if I take us back to 20,000 feet in the international arena, which I lovingly call the Gs, so G7 and G20. Now this is where most people don't realize, but global policy is formulated here. And then it trickles down to the national level, and this is where the citizens then see, hear, and feel it. And in 2010, the B20 was created as the business engagement arm of the G20. So it provides tangible, workable, business-oriented policy recommendations to the G20. And in 2020, the Women in Business Action Council was created. And it was created to provide policy recommendations for women in business by women in business, because that's who really has the understanding.
Finally.
Finally. And if we go forward a couple of years, the Women in Business Action Council created a One Global Women Empowerment Platform. And it's still in the works. And the International Organization of Employers, they took over the secretariat for it. But really, it's for women in business, so owners and also in the workplace, to come together to potentially find networking partners, mentors, find out about global policy, and so on, and basically get support. But if I move away from the Gs, then let's look at the World Economic Forum. And they've created a Closing the Gender Gap Accelerator. Now, this is a 3-year time-bound model, but it brings together business, government, and civil society to come together for nationally appropriate action plans. And I think that this is actually a really great recommendation for the G20, especially with their Brisbane 25 by 25. So what's that? In 2015, in Brisbane, after the economic housing crisis, what the countries did, the leaders had gotten together to close the gender gap. So they committed to this, to close the gender gap in the workforce by 25% by 2025. Now, why is this important? Simply because if you're going to increase or grow global economic resiliency and have growth, the male population really is at full participation. So you need to bring in the women. Mm-hmm. And so this was a really good way to start, but that was almost 10 years ago. So we're kind of running out of time, and progress was made, but we know that COVID set things back a bit.
COVID set things back a lot. Mm-hmm. And, in Canada right now, for every dollar a man makes, a woman makes 87 cents. And I know that the spread is a lot further apart worldwide. And so this is really, really important, especially the fact that they had put together the B20 and included all these women, mm-hmm. and created something for women, by women.
Right.
So when we come back, we are going to discuss more of the Global Women's Economic Empowerment with Lida and all the different summits that she's been to and learned from, and that we can learn from as well. So please don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Empowered. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski. Today's episode, we're discussing global women's economic empowerment. So Lida, the next question is, what do you think is the biggest challenge for women's economic empowerment at the global level?
Well, I think this is twofold. So on the G's level, the first thing is continuity. So each year, the presidency rotates from country to country. And so do the priorities, which is also a problem for the B20, because it's kind of like Groundhog Day. You're starting fresh every single year.
Mm-hmm.
And the second part is execution, because what you need is structural change from the governments in order for action to really take place. But every country is at a different stage in their gender equality journey. And so you don't have something where consensus can be found. For example, in the West, we're still, and you mentioned it before, we're working on the gender gap for parity for pay, and then also retention of women in senior leadership positions. But in the global South, what we have is some women can't even open a bank account without a male relative signing permission. And some of them can't own land, even though the business they have is cultivating the land and farming, which is feeding the entire community.
Right. You know, these are things that we don't even think about. These are things that, unless you are, going to Europe or visiting on a global scale, you don't see that. And a lot of people assume that, okay, well, this is the way we live here and this is the way everybody else lives over there. You mentioned retention of senior women leaders as being one of the challenges, and it seems to be elusive to a lot of companies. Why do you think this is the reason? Like, why do you think it's elusive to companies?
Well, to me, this is all about behavioral economics. And so there are companies who are really proud about having policies and procedures in place for gender diversity and equality. And tone from the top is vital to make sure that this actually happens. But having a written creed just isn't enough.
Mm-hmm.
What you have to look at is the basic culture of the company itself. So is it a dog-eat-dog world? Is it the almighty dollar at all costs and above everything else? Is it collaborative or is it combative? So if you have an antiquated culture, your results are going to be muted at best. And no tone from the top is going to convince a woman to work at that company. So what companies need to do is create business practices that are going to attract women to their workforce. They already do that to get millennials to come who want to work at companies that are sustainably responsible. So why not for women? Now, we've got people and companies who don't want to implement initiatives unless there's a positive incentive to their bottom line. So I've got a stat for that.
Okay.
And it's nothing new, but it's from McKinsey. And they did a study where companies who had greater gender diversity in their executive team were 25% more likely to outperform on profitability than companies who did not. And a little bit further on that, if the company executive team had ethnic and cultural diversity, that number goes up to 36%. So these are real hard numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And companies just aren't they lack ambitious plans. I saw one company who was super proud to say that they were going to increase their women in senior leadership by 2% over the next 3
Bravo.
years. I mean, what are we even talking about here? Like half a woman, right? So, and just for context, they were starting at just over 20% of women in senior leadership, and they were going to move a whole 2%. So we're lacking some ambition out there.
You know what? And to add to that too, I've heard that there are certain companies out there that pride themselves on empowering women and having them move up to the senior ranks. Yet they don't have a system to help them stay senior. And typically they end up failing within time because they don't have that network to uphold them there.
No, that's very true. And it's something that I think what can help with that is some of the actions that companies can take in order to really retain women in senior leadership positions and get them there. So the first one is obvious. Look at the hiring and promotion policies of a company and make sure that there are people in middle management. Because if you don't have a pool of people in the middle, you have nobody to grab from to go to the top. And another thing I think is vital is mentorship is really important, but sponsorship is even more important. And this is when somebody puts your name forward when you're not even in the room and introduces you to people that you never would have met. So what they're doing, and especially in male-dominated industries, is we have to have male sponsors for the women.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back, so please don't go away. Welcome back to Empowered. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski. Today, we are discussing global women's economic empowerment. Lida, I want to talk about COVID because a lot of women step back from their senior leadership roles, whatever jobs they had during COVID. So we've lost so many of them during the lockdown. How can we get them back into the workforce?
Well, this is a very good question. And the simple answer is make your company a place where women will want to come work. But it's a little bit more complicated than that because while there were a lot of negatives that came with COVID, people really took the time to rethink what they found was important. And we had, no matter where you live, we had a very stark reminder of how precious life can be. Mm-hmm. So the traditional work till you break and don't see your friends and family, that's not really attractive to people anymore. So for those who left, there was an exponential digital advancement that took place during COVID. And that allowed a lot of women, and men, of course, but a lot of women to be able to build their own businesses digitally and also explore new industries. So while some of them came back, they just didn't come back to those traditional jobs. And there was a study by the Women's Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub. In 2022, nearly 1 million women in Canada were self-employed, and the number of women-owned businesses was growing. This is fantastic because on top of that, what ends up happening is women tend to invest their incomes back in their families and the communities. So this actually does keep going. Now, I know I'm being a little bit simplistic. There's a whole lot of women who didn't come back into the workforce, but we actually now have another problem, and that is for the women who stayed, because increasingly they are feeling overcapacity, burned out, and fully underappreciated.
You know, it's interesting that you talked about entrepreneurship, because I had Janet Lewis on the show, and she was basically saying, now is the time to be an entrepreneur. So she was saying the exact same thing that you were saying. You know, throughout COVID, a lot of women had started their own businesses. What makes me sad is the women who stayed in are underappreciated.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to fix that. And I don't know whether there is a solution to fix it.
Well, I put a little bit of a warning out to the companies. If they don't fix it, these women are going to leave.
Yeah.
And then they're going to have even fewer women in senior leadership. So it's not something that you and I can fix, but it's something that the women who stayed and who are burned out, they have to feel okay to either make a move, but do they have time, right?
Yeah.
This is where the overcapacity comes in.
Yeah.
So the good part about COVID was you could, multitask. You could be a mom, you had the family, you could work, but increasingly they put in way more hours than they would have had they gone to an office.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. I want to talk about COP28. I need you to explain what it is to me first, because I know I spoke to you before you went to Dubai to this conference. But there was a tremendous amount of money announced towards climate change action. Now, do you think that this presents an opportunity for women's economic empowerment when they talk about, a lot of money going towards climate change?
Oh, absolutely. Now, like never before, we have a real opportunity to exponentially move the needle for women's economic empowerment and globally.
So explain to me what COP28 is.
Okay, so it's actually COP28, and it's Conference of the Parties.
Okay.
It's for the United Nations, and this is when the world comes together. It's like the Super Bowl of climate change.
Okay.
For people. And so the reason I think that this is such a great opportunity is because in the first 4 days of COP28 alone, 57 billion US dollars was mobilized for climate action. And that's historic.
Mm-hmm.
But climate action and climate solutions, they have a perception problem. So most people, and this is more so in North America than anywhere else in the world, but people think that investing in climate change solutions equals philanthropy. But nobody starts a business hoping that it's going to lose money.
Right.
And there are winners and losers in every industry. That's just capitalism. Yet somehow, when a green business doesn't make it, it's blamed on the fact that it's a green business. And this is, for what I say to that, is when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at tend to change. And so all this money flowing around is actually really great for women entrepreneurs because they actually do start businesses in this space.
Okay, so we're going to continue on with the Global Women's Economic Empowerment. More with Lida Preyma when we come back, so please don't go away. Super interesting. Welcome back to Empowered. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski. I'm joined by Lida Preyma, founder and CEO of Cēlandaire Capital and co-founder and managing partner of Global Climate Finance Accelerator. We're discussing global women's economic empowerment. Before we went to break, we were talking about climate change.
We were, and we were talking about the tremendous opportunity that we now have for women's economic empowerment and climate change and all the money that was mobilized. I said that it was a really great time for women entrepreneurs in this space, and I'll tell you why. So in that same study from the Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub, they also found that women tended to start companies that were more innovative. And even more so, they are more likely than men to start companies that focus on environmental and social sustainability efforts. And so if we look back, this makes sense. If we look back, who was the first person to teach us about reduce, reuse, and recycle?
Mom.
Bingo. It was our moms.
Yep.
They mended our clothes. They reused jars. They grew gardens. Mm-hmm. Every bit of food went into a meal.
Absolutely. A stew, some sort of a stew.
Mystery meatloaf. So this was ingrained in us as women. So if we take it back to this money, it's naturally going to flow into the businesses that women create because they're creating businesses in this space. And so what we also have to look at is the fact that women, once the knock-on effect, once women create these companies, they hire more women, they promote on merit. So the culture is a place where women want to work and they will also thrive.
Right.
And again, they're going to put the money back in their families and the communities. And to go a little bit further on that, countries this year have to put in a new national climate action plan. And so this is the time to really ingrain gender equality into the national action plans, because you can, in fact, look at who we're sending to the negotiating table, but go one step further with gender disaggregated data. You can see where the impacts are of climate change and create a strategy around it. And then, of course, gender responsive financing for climate action, because even though money will flow naturally to these companies, we have to make sure there's a concerted effort for it to happen on a larger scale.
There's so much going on here.
So much going on.
Now, I want to go back to corporations.
Mm-hmm.
What can companies do to retain women in senior leadership positions?
So we've talked about a couple. So we're, look at the middle management practices so you have a pool of people. It's sponsorship. Not enough companies have male sponsors for females. Value transferable skills. But, there's a topic that makes people uncomfortable, but which we need to change the narrative around, and that is menopause.
That seems to be one of the topics that keeps popping up on this show. Everyone is mentioning menopause right now.
Well, if you think about it, we've come a long way for women in the childbearing years, and we've got policies around maternity, paternity leave. Mm-hmm. And it's great for when they're entering their career and the first part of their career. But not every woman is going to have a baby. Yep. But almost every woman is going to go through menopause.
Right.
And guess when that hits?
When you're in senior management.
Bingo. It's when you're climbing the corporate ladder, the
Right.
senior management ladder. So companies really need to wake up, because there was an article in the Harvard Business Review, and it stated that by 2025, over 1 billion people worldwide are going to be experiencing menopause. And countries' populations aren't getting any younger. I mean, some of them are, but the majority of them are not. And what's more is that number is going to increase. But even more so, by 2030, which is not far away, over 25% of the female worldwide population is going to be menopausal.
Yeah.
So companies really need to step up their game here. And you need to do, small changes. Things like paid time off so people don't have to take vacation days. How about having a cooler temperatured room so women don't have to sit at their desk going through a hot flash, sweating and being embarrassed?
Yeah.
Make sure that your benefits and your mental health benefits include both natural and also pharmaceutical symptom relief. And then also just make sure that you have education sessions, because people need to know what's going on in order to understand and be empathetic.
Thank you so much, Lida.
Thank you.
Lida says economic empowerment means the provision of agency for women to be able to control their own destiny and independence through wealth creation. We need to be mindful of how they can achieve it, since it's different around the world, because different countries are in different stages of their gender equality journey. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski, and I'm here to empower you and make frugality fashionable. Thank you so much for watching. Bye for now.